What's going on, guys? This is Boss Jansen, and today we're going to carry on our Back to Basics series by looking in depth at compression. In front of me, I have Miavaova by Raza. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I think it'd be great to check out for this lesson. So as we said in the last two videos, I'll be using Logic for this lesson. I'm not the smoothest at Logic, so if there's anything you see I could be doing more smoothly and more efficiently, please leave it in the comments. We're all trying to learn together. So yeah, with this now we've covered levels in panning and the basics of EQ. If you haven't checked those out already, you maybe want to head over to the page and get caught up with those before we look at this. But if you're up to speed, let's look at some compression. So again, I'm just going to look at this lead vocal here for the verse. For the sake of explaining the makeup of a compressor, I'm going to use this Waves C1 compressor just because I think visually it makes it easier to explain. But then when we get to actually using it on Neoni's voice, I'm going to hop over to the Logic stock so you guys can see exactly how that one would work if you don't have any fancy plugins. So as far as this compressor is concerned, we're really going to be looking at these four parameters here: threshold, ratio, attack, and release. Those are the important ones when it comes to understanding a compressor, and the rest get into more advanced material that we don't need to cover for right now. But let's check out what we have here. So the job of a compressor is to reduce the dynamic range. So that means any sound that crosses the threshold, that crosses the bar we set as this is too loud, the compressor will start bringing the volume of those down to a more acceptable range that we set for it. So that being said, the threshold is our yellow line here. The ratio is basically how steep we tell the compressor to attenuate to bring down the sounds that cross the threshold. And the attack and release is basically how fast we tell it to knock those sounds down and how fast we tell it to let go of any of the sounds that we have now deemed acceptable. So yeah, the threshold is literally just a mark on the line where we say, this is too loud, bring it down, please. So the ratio we said is basically the rate at which we tell the compressor to knock our sounds down that breach the wall. And that's literally signified with a ratio. So here we have a 1-to-1 ratio. That means it's not going to knock anything down at all. So if we set our ratio to 4-to-1, that means for every 4 decibels that crosses our threshold, the compressor will knock it down to 1 decibel over. So lastly, the attack and the release. So the attack time that we set is basically going to be how long we want to let our signal cross the threshold before we tell the compressor to start acting on it. So that being said, typically our attack and release times are set in milliseconds. So this one right now is set to an attack time of 2 milliseconds. So when a signal crosses the threshold, it's going to allow it to sit where it wants for 2 milliseconds before it's going to start taking it down at a ratio of 4-to-1. And then the release is once the signal has come down under the threshold, how long it's going to hold on to still knocking it down at 4-to-1 before it lets go. So right now at 50 milliseconds, once the signal goes back under the threshold, it's going to be 50 milliseconds before the compressor is going to let go. So let's jump over to our Logic compressor and see what that means and see how we dial that in for Neoni here. So for the sake of example, I'm going to set our attack on the slower side and then I guess our release on the faster side. And just to make it really obvious what we're listening to, I'm going to set the threshold pretty low and compress pretty hard. So let's see what it sounds like when Neoni is singing through a compressor with a slow attack. So yeah, you can see it obviously spit through pretty hard between her, consonants and plosives and whatnot. They spit through pretty hard when the attack is taking too long to react to it. So conversely, let's try with a extremely fast attack and see what that sounds like.
mandeni futona mamenjani tungo chani twera na samia fasha dinyuluna.
So with our threshold being so low, it's basically grabbing everything. And I don't know if you noticed, but it was really catching her breaths as well. So those breaths were basically as loud as her vocal itself, which might not be a great idea because it's going to be very distracting. So with that being said, that's kind of covered all of our basics here. Typically for a vocal, I would actually use 2 compressors. The important thing to remember with all that is that you never, especially with a vocal, not want to compress too much because it's going to sound unnatural, it's going to sound weird. And dynamics are very important for the emotion and the rhythm of a vocal. So when I use 2, I would use the first one on a very fast attack to maybe get 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction to grab the extreme peaks. And then our second compressor at a slower attack, so it's more subtle, and that does up to at most 10 dB compression. But, you know, for Neoni, someone more natural, like 5 to 7 dB, so we're not doing anything too crazy. But that's a rundown of our basics. All these other knobs in here, as I said, are the more advanced side of things, which we can get to at a later date if you guys want to. But for the most part, those are our basics. If there's any questions on anything that I haven't made clear enough in this video, please leave them in the comments. If you have any suggestions on other videos you want me to cover, please leave them in the comments. Other than that, subscribe so you don't miss the next gems. And other than that, have fun mixing.